Do you find yourself constantly scanning your partner's face for signs they're upset? Or maybe you shut down emotionally the moment conflict arises. If love feels like you have to walk on eggshells or build walls to protect yourself, your attachment system might be stuck in survival mode. And that chronic state of stress could be rewiring your brain in ways that harm your long-term cognitive health. So in today's episode, we're going to discuss why this happened and what you can do about it so that social connection can be protective instead of harmful. All right? Without further ado, let's get started. Welcome to Happy and Healthy with Amy, the brain health podcast for women in midlife who want to not just survive, but actually thrive during the menopause transition and beyond. I'm Amy Lang, master health coach, best-selling author, and daughter of Alzheimer's, and I'm here to help you make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome back to Happy and Healthy with Amy, the brain health podcast for women in midlife who want to not just survive, but actually thrive during the menopause transition and beyond. So this is our special series on the many ways relationships shape your brain. Because the truth is, social connection isn't just emotional, it's neurological. And while healthy relationships protect your brain, toxic patterns can rewire it for stress, disconnection, and even disease, like Alzheimer's. So in this episode, we're exploring attachment trauma. So this is a relationship dynamic that may be quietly sabotaging your brain health. So we're going to talk about how to identify it and address it so you can ultimately heal it. I'm Amy Lang, master health coach, author, and daughter of Alzheimer's. And I'm here to help you make this next chapter of your life the best one yet. All right, so last week we talked about how people-pleasing is actually a form of self-abandonment. Today, we're going deeper into why some relationships feel like emotional roller coasters. And it all traces back to our earliest experiences with love and safety. So to start, I want to tell you about a moment when I was 4 years old that taught my nervous system that my emotions weren't safe with my caregivers, with my mom and dad. So my mom worked for Fago, which was a beverage company, and they hosted a company picnic. It was one of those summer events with lots of family and food, and unfortunately, lots of bees buzzing around. And I still remember I was drinking a can of Fago Red Pop, and I got worried that a bee might get inside my can. So my mom understood and appreciated my concern, and she tried to help by putting a Kleenex tissue over the opening of the can and then put a rubber band around it to secure it. But somehow, a bee managed to get inside anyway. So at one point, when I opened the can and I took a sip, it stung me right on my tongue, right here on the tip. And of course, I started crying, as any 4-year-old would do when they're hurt and scared. But apparently, I was crying too long for my dad. So I still remember that he was looking around and he said that people were watching us and he wanted me to stop crying. And when I didn't stop quickly enough, he told me he was going to catch another bee and put it in my mouth. Of course, that moment wasn't just about a bee sting. It was about learning whether my emotional needs would be met with comfort or threat. And early lessons like this literally wire our brains for how we'll handle relationships for decades to come. Now, if this kind of story resonates with you, if you've ever felt like your emotions were too much for the people who were supposed to love you and take care of you and protect you, stay with me, because understanding how these patterns developed is the first step to changing them. So let's start by discussing or defining what attachment actually is, because it's much more specific than most people realize. So according to attachment theory, attachment is one aspect of the relationship between a child and caregiver that's all about making the child feel safe, secure, and protected, as opposed to what attachment is not. It's not about playing with or entertaining a child, okay? That's the parent as a playmate. And it's not about feeding the child. That's the parent as caregiver. And it's not about setting limits. That's the parent as disciplinarian. And finally, it's not about teaching new skills. That's the parent as a teacher. So attachment is where the child uses the primary caregiver as a secure base from which to explore the world, and when necessary, as a safe haven for comfort. So you can think of it like a home base in a game of tag. When the world feels safe, the child ventures out to explore. And when something feels threatening or overwhelming, they run back to their secure base to recharge and feel safe again. Now here's where Dr. Alan Shore's work becomes really important. So Dr. Shore is a psychologist and researcher in neuropsychology. And he emphasizes the role of the right brain in emotional regulation. Now, while this isn't universally embraced across all the therapeutic traditions, his core insight that attachment is fundamentally about learning to regulate emotions or affect has become a cornerstone in psychology and child development. So, Dr. Shore discovered that the years from 0 to 2 are absolutely critical because this is when the child's emotional brain is developing most rapidly. And here's the thing. Young children literally can't regulate their own emotions, right? They don't have the brain development for what's called auto-regulation, as in managing emotions on their own. You can think self-soothing, okay? Instead, they depend entirely on interactive regulation from their primary caregiver, which is most often the mother. So picture this. When a baby is upset, a secure caregiver doesn't just change the diaper or offer food, right? A secure caregiver would tune into the baby's emotional state, match their energy, and then gently guide them back to calm. It's about empathy here. So the mom's regulated nervous system becomes the template for the baby's developing emotional regulation system. So when this works well, the child learns that emotions are manageable, that relationships are safe, and that they're worthy of comfort and care. Okay, that's the foundation for healthy relationships throughout life. And research says about 60% of us have what's called secure attachment. But what happens now when this system breaks down? Well, that's where my bee sting story comes in. So at 4 years old, my nervous system was asking for interactive regulation, right? I needed my caregivers to help me process the pain, the fear, and the shock of being stung on my tongue, no less. And while my mom was there to comfort me, what I learned from my dad was that my big emotions were threatening to him, and that if I didn't regulate myself quickly enough, I'd face even more threat. Now, this is how attachment trauma develops. And here's what's important to understand. It's usually not about single dramatic events. More often, it's about patterns where caregivers consistently can't provide the emotional support that children desperately need. Now, it probably seems like I keep throwing my dad under the bus, right? Between this bee sting story and the one about my bedroom door in the last episode. But I want to acknowledge that my dad had a lot of trauma when he was growing up. And he never got a chance to really work through it, right? I don't even think he knows that that's really an option. So I am incredibly grateful. Grateful not only because I did get the chance to heal, but also because I'm now able to share my experiences and say that if you have experiences like this, you can, with help, if you're willing to do the work, be in a much better place too. And by the way, I did work through this bee sting memory with Dr. Pam Oblidinger using EMDR therapy, which I'll talk more about at the end of this episode. All right, so going back to Dr. Shore's research, he shows us exactly how these attachment patterns wire the developing brain. Okay, he found that attachment isn't just about bonding. It's about how a child's nervous system learns to regulate stress and emotion through their caregiver. So we talked about what secure attachment looks like. There are 3 insecure attachment patterns, 3 main ones that we need to talk about. And I'm going to walk you through how they develop now. The first one is anxious attachment. So this comes from what Dr. Shore calls consistent but mismatched or misattuned caregiving. So think about a parent who is loving but often anxious or unpredictable. So the child experiences periods of comfort, but also periods of uncertainty. So never fully knowing whether the caregiver will meet their emotional needs. So what does this do? This literally wires the child's stress systems for overdrive. The child learns to amplify their distress signals to try to pull the caregiver back into connection. So a child then becomes preoccupied with monitoring the caregiver's emotional state rather than feeling safe in their own skin. Right? The second type of insecure attachment style is avoidant attachment. And this develops when a caregiver is emotionally unavailable, dismissive, or rejecting. So instead of soothing a child's distress, the caregiver signals, whether consciously or unconsciously, that the child's emotional needs are unwelcome. And as a result, the child learns that expressing distress won't bring comfort. Sometimes it even leads to more distance. So here, because interactive regulation is lacking, a child is then forced to develop emotional self-reliance or auto-regulation way too early. Okay, but this isn't healthy auto-regulation. It's defensive. So a child is learning here to suppress or disconnect from emotional states rather than truly processing through them. Right? So outwardly, a child can look independent, but internally, their stress system remains stuck in high gear. All right? A third type of insecure attachment style is called disorganized attachment. And this emerges from what Dr. Shore calls fear without solution. And this happens when the primary caregiver is simultaneously a source of comfort and a source of fear. So this often happens with abuse or neglect, or when the caregiver himself or herself is frightened or traumatized. But the child winds up facing an impossible paradox, right? I need you to help me feel safe, but you're also the one I fear. So when this happens, a child's ability to manage emotions essentially falls apart, right? Their system swings between panic mode and complete shutdown. And they're never able to find stable middle ground. And here's Dr. Shore's key insight. Interactive regulation is supposed to lead to healthy auto-regulation. So when co-regulation with caregivers, that interactive regulation, is secure and consistent, then children gradually learn to manage their own emotions in healthy ways. So secure attachment means that you have a mix of interactive and auto-regulation. And you're able to switch back and forth depending on the situation, what's appropriate for the situation, right? But when interactive regulation fails, again, we're talking about in those first few years of a child's life, the child's emotional management system, emotional regulation system, develops in distorted ways. And these patterns literally shape their developing brain. So again, it's getting wired for survival rather than true connection. Now, here's where this connects to what we talked about in episode 301 about social connection protecting your brain, being a protective factor for dementia. But remember, the quality of those connections matters enormously. So when your attachment system is stuck in survival mode from these early patterns, you're not getting the brain protective benefits of secure connection. So when your attachment system is stuck in survival mode from these early patterns, you're not able to get the brain protective benefits of secure connection. So how does this show up in our adult relationships? So again, how do these childhood patterns show up in adult relationships? Well, if you developed anxious attachment, you might find yourself constantly scanning your partner's face for signs of disconnection. You might even feel panic when they seem distant or have reactions that feel way bigger than the situation warrants. Why? Because your nervous system is still unconsciously seeking that interactive regulation, but from your partner instead of your caregiver. Okay, so from a brain health perspective, this creates chronic stress hormone elevation, right? Your nervous system is constantly activated, scanning for relationship threats. And as you learned in the previous episode on people pleasing, chronic elevation of your cortisol levels in your brain can shrink your hippocampus, which is the memory center of your brain. That's the part of your brain that is affected first in Alzheimer's disease. Right? Now, if you developed avoidant attachment, you might find yourself shutting down emotionally during conflicts, right? You're avoiding emotion. Or you might find yourself pulling away when a relationship gets too intimate. So again, with avoidant attachment, you learned to over-rely on managing emotions alone. But you also cut yourself off from the brain protective benefits of secure connection. So when we consistently avoid emotional intimacy, we actually dampen our brain's oxytocin and social reward systems. So we literally are depriving ourselves of the protective effects of social connection, the one that we talked about in episode 301. Right? And then disorganized attachment, that third style, shows up as chaotic switching between these two patterns. So one day you're clingy and desperate for connection, and then the next you could be completely shut down. So this creates, as I'm sure you can imagine, maximum stress on your nervous system, because there's no predictable way to feel safe in relationships, right? Our brain really doesn't like uncertainty. Now, here's a really common mistake that a lot of people make, and I want you to be aware of it. And that's confusing trauma bonds with healthy bonds. So when someone with insecure attachment experiences on-again, off-again patterns in relationships, right? Periods of intense connection followed by disconnection, or warmth followed by coldness, it can create an addiction-like cycle in the brain. So the unpredictability triggers dopamine release. So this can make the relationship feel intensely passionate or exciting. But again, this isn't healthy love. It's your nervous system mistaking familiar patterns of emotional chaos for connection. So for someone who's used to trauma bonds, secure, healthy attachment might actually feel boring at first because it lacks that emotional roller coaster intensity. But remember what we talked about in episode 301. Real connection is about feeling seen, heard, and valued. Right? It's about belonging and acceptance, not constant emotional drama. Secure attachment is consistent, predictable, and actually calming to your nervous system. It doesn't create that addictive high and low cycle, but it also doesn't flood your brain with stress hormones. So the bottom line is this: when you can't effectively manage emotions in relationships, whether because you're hypervigilant, shut down, or chaotic, your stress hormones stay chronically elevated. And this creates inflammation throughout your body and brain, which contributes to the exact processes that increase dementia risk. Now here's the good news, and this is really important, all right? The same neuroplasticity that allowed these patterns to form in childhood can help you create new, healthier patterns now, right? You can learn new patterns now. So I said earlier that 60% of adults formed secure attachment. That means that there's about 40% of us that have insecure attachment styles. All right? So here's a really important key insight that I want you to have if you have an insecure attachment style. Our attachment wounds happen in relationship. So they need to heal in relationship. Let me repeat that. Attachment wounds happen in relationship. So they need to heal in relationship. All right? So I'm going to give you 3 pathways to healing that actually work. First, learn to recognize when you're emotionally overwhelmed. This means understanding your window of tolerance, that zone where you can handle emotions without getting completely overwhelmed or shutting down. So when you notice yourself getting activated beyond that window, that's your cue to pause and regulate before trying to engage with someone. So how do you know if you're activated? Well, you might notice that your heart is racing, or your thoughts are spinning, or you might feel like you want to run away or attack. These are signals that your nervous system has shifted into survival mode. All right? Second, practice interactive regulation in safe relationships. And this is where good therapy can be incredibly powerful. And I want to emphasize good therapy because the key to effective therapy, to that therapeutic relationship for attachment healing, isn't just about talking about your problems. It's experiencing co-regulation with a skilled therapist. So I mentioned I worked through that bee sting memory using EMDR therapy. So EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. So EMDR is particularly effective for attachment trauma because it works with the emotional brain, where these early patterns stored. So other effective approaches include somatic therapy, internal family systems, or any approach that focuses on the relational and the body-based aspects of healing. And the key, right, what matters here is that the therapeutic relationship itself becomes a place to learn secure attachment. Right? Third is to develop healthy auto-regulation skills, but not at the expense of connection. So this means learning to manage emotions independently when needed, while still staying open to support from others. And the beautiful thing about Dr. Shore's research is this insight. Healing happens through the same process that should have happened in early childhood. Right brain to right brain connection with someone whose nervous system is regulated and safe. So, whether that's through therapy, through good friendships, or with intimate partners, the brain circuits that learned insecurity can learn security through new experiences, through new relationships. Okay, so this isn't just psychological healing. It's literally rewiring your brain for better emotional regulation and, as a consequence, healthier relationships. And remember, better emotional regulation means better brain health. When your nervous system learns to find safety in connection, rather than constantly scanning for threat, you free up enormous cognitive resources for memory, for creativity, and for clear thinking. Again, I want you to remember, attachment wounds happen in relationship, and they heal in relationship. And it's truly never too late to learn secure attachment. So if you recognize yourself in today's episode, whether you're the person constantly scanning for threats or the one building walls when things get too close, please know that these patterns developed as brilliant adaptations to help you survive. Okay? They are not personality traits or character flaws. They're evidence of your nervous system's incredible ability to adapt. And with the right support, these same patterns can change. Your nervous system can learn that relationships can be safe, that emotions are manageable, and that you deserve secure, regulated, calming love. All right? So next week, we're diving into another relationship pattern that can damage brain health: the emotional vampire effect. So this is when relationships drain your energy rather than nourish it. All right? So if you found today's episode helpful and you're watching this on YouTube, please hit that like button and subscribe now. I don't know which way to point. And if you're listening, I would love for you to head over to YouTube and subscribe, because I'm going to be posting my latest masterclass on stress, resilience, and the XX brain. And I really don't want you to miss it. All right? Lastly, if you're ready and excited about creating more positive relationships and more social connection in your life, I invite you to join the priority list for Second Spring Society. All right, this is my new brain health membership. And we're not just talking about boundaries and brain health. We are literally creating a community of like-minded women who see you, hear you, walk beside you, laugh with you, and celebrate with you. So you can find the link in the show notes or in the description. You can use the QR code on the screen if you're watching, or you can go to moxie-club.com/society. Okay? So again, remember, social connection is protective when our relationships are positive and healthy. And healing is possible together. Alrighty? So I'm going to wrap things up today with a quote by Sean Stevenson. Communication is merely an exchange of information, but connection is an exchange of our humanity.